The gunshot cracked the night like thunder, one bullet then two more echoing across the empty highway. A 60-year-old black woman slumped against her steering wheel, her hands still gripping it tight, headlights glowing weakly into the dark. Blue and red police sirens flashed over her lifeless face as the officer holstered his weapon. Breathing heavy but cold, muttering words that would soon become his excuse, she resisted. Her son miles away had just silenced his ringing phone when another call came, a frantic neighbor's voice, telling him to hurry, to run, because something terrible had happened. Tires screeched on asphalt as he sped into the night, heart hammering in his chest. Every second stretched like a blade cutting deeper into his fear. By the time he arrived, the street was sealed with yellow tape, cold night air heavy with the stench of gasoline and blood. His mother's car sat crooked, lights still on, windshield shattered. He tried to push past the officers, screaming her name, but strong arms held him back. A medic shook their head softly. It was too late. His knees buckled. The world spun. His cries split the silence, raw and jagged, as the officer who pulled the trigger scribbled something casual in his notepad, eyes avoiding the son's gaze. In that moment, grief fused into something sharper, darker. The law would bury her truth, just like it had buried countless others. He looked at the badge-covered men around him, their silence as violent as the bullets, and he whispered through clenched teeth, a vow that would stain his soul forever. If the law won't punish them, I will. His vow echoed in the night, burning like fire in his chest. If the law won't punish them, I will. But before rage consumed him, there had been peace. Before blood stained his memories, there had been laughter, warmth, and the quiet comfort of a life he thought would last forever. Every morning his mother's voice had been his alarm clock. She never shouted, never scolded. Instead, she would knock gently on his door and call out with the same tender humor she had since he was a boy. Get up, lazy bones. The sun's been up an hour, and I don't raise a man who lets the world pass him by. He'd stumble out, rubbing his eyes, only to be greeted by the smell of frying bacon and homemade biscuits. She always cooked too much, claiming she wasn't hungry, then stealing bites from his plate with a sly grin. Breakfast was never just food, it was her way of grounding him, reminding him that no matter how hard life outside was, inside their home, he was loved. In the evenings, their ritual was simple. He worked long hours at the auto shop, grizz under his nails and exhaustion weighing him down, but the moment he stepped through the front door, she'd be there waiting. Sometimes it was a pot of gumbo simmering on the stove, other times just 2 mugs of tea on the porch. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they sat in silence, watching the world grow dark, content simply to exist side by side. Sundays were sacred. His mother's church hat collection could have filled a closet. Bright colors, wide brims, decorated with ribbons or flowers. She insisted on dressing her best, not for vanity, but as a way of honoring the God she believed still watched over them, even when the world didn't. He would drive her to church, teasing her about the weight of her hats, and she would swat his arm playfully, reminding him that faith was heavy but worth carrying. And late at night, when the house grew still, their bond stretched through a single hallway wall, she'd call him on the phone, even though he was just a room away, laughing quietly into the receiver. Boy, you home yet? He'd laugh too, answering, Mama, I've been home all evening. I know, I just like hearing your voice. Those were the moments that built his world, not the big milestones, but the small threads of ordinary love woven into every day, and he never imagined they could be ripped away so quickly. The irony haunted him now, how fragile those moments really were. Just a day before her death, she had made peach cobbler, humming softly in the kitchen as old records played. He had leaned against the doorway, smiling at her, telling her she was the best cook in the county. She had laughed, swatting at him with a wooden spoon. Don't you flatter me, you'll make me burn the crust. If he had known that would be the last time he'd see her dance between stove and counter, he would have memorized every detail, the way her gray-streaked curls bounced as she moved, the light in her eyes when she teased him, the rhythm of her hum blending with the crackle of the oven. Instead, he had taken it for granted, as children always do, believing mothers are eternal, and yet, in those quiet days, shadows lingered at the edge of their peace. She had warned him once, voice heavy with the weight of her years, you be careful out there, don't give them a reason. Sometimes, baby, reason don't matter. He had brushed it off, half smiling, telling her not to worry so much, but she had stared at him, long and hard, as if she already knew what the future held. Now, replaying those moments, he felt the sharp sting of regret. That ordinary life, the breakfasts, the tea, the Sunday drives, had been his shield against the cruelty of the world, and with one pull of a trigger, it was gone. The quiet had turned to chaos, the laughter to silence, and the son who once lived for her joy now breathed only for her justice. The sweetness of that last peach cobbler still lingered in his memory when the night came crashing down. It was late, and the town had gone quiet. Storefronts were dark, sidewalks empty, only the occasional street lamp buzzing faintly against the heavy southern air. His mother had gone out to visit a friend a few blocks away, insisting she didn't need him to drive her. "It's just a short trip," she had said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Besides, you look tired. Stay home and rest." He had wanted to argue, but she smiled in that soft, stubborn way only mothers can, and he let her go. Hours later, as he lay half asleep on the couch, the words she had spoken weeks earlier came echoing back. "Sometimes, baby, reason don't matter." At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. Now, those words clawed at his chest, scratching an unease he couldn't shake. Somewhere down the road, her old sedan rattled gently over the cracked asphalt. The heater hummed low, gospel music spilling softly from the radio, her voice humming along. Her world was small but steady, her faith strong enough to quiet most fears. But even she felt the pulse of headlights in her rearview mirror. Red and blue suddenly flooded her car. Sirens barked once, sharp and cold. Her heart dropped. She eased the car to the shoulder, trembling hands tightening around the steering wheel. She knew these roads, knew the stories whispered in kitchens and church basements, black mothers warning their children to keep their heads down, to survive first and fight later. 2 officers stepped out, boots crunching gravel. One circled behind her car, flashlight beams slicing across her back window. The other approached her side, heavy steps, hand resting too casually on his holster. "License and registration," he barked, before her window was even halfway down. "Yes, sir, of course, sir." Her voice shook. She reached slowly to her purse. "I don't want no trouble." The flashlight stabbed into her face. "What are you hiding in there, huh?" Nothing, officer. Just my license." The second cop kicked at her rear bumper, muttering with a laugh. "Piece of junk." Figures she swallowed hard, voice cracking. "Please, I'm just trying to get home. My son, he's waiting for me." "Step out of the vehicle," the first officer ordered, tone sharp enough to slice through her pleading. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She shook her head, tears welling. "I didn't do anything wrong." "Please." "Did I stutter?" His hand closed around the butt of his gun. Out now the night thickened with dread. Every sound magnified: the chirp of crickets, the static of the police radio, her own shallow breaths. She fumbled with the door handle, her hands trembling too violently to find it. "See that?" the second cop sneered, resisting. No, I'm not pleased. I'll get out." She finally pushed the door open, stepping onto the cold gravel, knees weak beneath her. Her palms lifted into the air, open and empty. The universal plea for mercy, but mercy was nowhere to be found. The first officer shoved her against the car, her shoulder slamming into the metal frame. Pain seared through her, and she cried out, "Please, I'll do whatever you say. Don't hurt me. Please." Her voice broke into sobs, but their ears were deaf to it. The second officer laughed under his breath, as if cruelty itself were entertainment. "Old woman's mouthy, never learn." She turned her head, tears streaking across her cheeks, whispering a prayer under her breath. Maybe it was for her son, maybe it was for the world to finally change. Then banked gunshot tore the night apart. Her body jerked, collapsing against the hood before sliding to the ground, eyes wide with shock, blood blooming dark against her blouse. For a moment, the silence was louder than the shot. Even the crickets stopped. The second cop stared, startled, but the first holstered his weapon, calmly, jaw tight. "She reached for something," he muttered, rehearsing the lie already forming in his mind, and just like that, peace was gone. Miles away, her son stirred on the couch, a sudden chill crawling up his spine. His phone buzzed on the table. One call, then another. When he answered, the neighbor's voice cracked with panic. "It's your mama. They shot her. The police shot her." His blood turned to ice. He grabbed his keys, heart pounding like a war drum, tires screaming as he tore through the streets. The world blurred around him, every red light ignored, every second dragging him closer to a nightmare he couldn't yet imagine. When he reached the scene, flashing lights blinded him. Yellow tape coiled around the area like a snake, keeping him out. His mother's car sat crooked on the shoulder, door hanging open, her shawl still caught on the frame. He ran forward, shouting her name, but arms shoved him back. A medic shook their head, silent and final. He fell to his knees, hands clawing at the gravel, throat raw from screaming, and above him, the officer who had fired the shot scribbled into his notepad, face stone cold, refusing to meet his eyes. Son looked up at that face, grief and rage fusing into one, and knew in that moment his world had shattered. This was no accident. This was the beginning, but beginnings often come disguised as endings, and for him, it began with the end of his mother's life. The funeral was small, quiet, and suffocating. The church smelled faintly of lilies and old wood polish, the air heavy with whispers and stifled sobs. He sat in the front pew, stiff as stone, staring at the polished oak coffin that held the only person who had ever truly loved him without condition. Her hat's a blue one with the ribbon she wore to church every Easter rested on top of the casket, a cruel reminder that she would never wear it again. Voices blurred together. Condolences came like waves, faces pressing close with words that meant nothing. She's in a better place, stay strong, God doesn't make mistakes. Each phrase struck him like a slap, hollow and unbearable. He wanted to scream better place. She should be here, strong. She was strong enough for both of us. Mistakes. That cop's bullet wasn't no accident, it was murder. When the choir sang, his chest tightened until he could barely breathe. Their voices lifted toward heaven, but his heart sank further into darkness. He gripped the pew so hard his knuckles went white, jaw trembling as he forced back the howl clawing at his throat. At the graveside, as dirt hit the coffin with soft, final thuds, he whispered words only the earth could hear. I should have been there, I should have stopped it. Forgive me, Mama. That night, the house was unbearable. Too quiet, too empty. Her chair sat by the window, untouched. Her Bible lay open on the table, her reading glasses resting on the page. He reached for them, held them in his hand like relics, and broke down. His sobs tore through the empty rooms, echoing against the walls until he could no longer tell where his grief ended and his rage began. But grief alone wasn't enough. He needed justice. The next morning he walked into the police station, eyes swollen but voice steady. I'm here to file a complaint, he told the desk clerk. The officer who killed my mother needs to be arrested. That was murder. The clerk avoided his eyes, typing something into the computer. Minutes later, a superior officer appeared, his tone cool and rehearsed. Your mother resisted arrest. She reached for something. The officers acted within protocol. His voice cracked, loud enough to turn heads. She was 60 years old. She was begging for her life. The officer sighed, as if exhausted by the conversation. If you'd like to pursue this, you can contact the district attorney's office. But I'll tell you the same thing I told the press, it was justified. The press. The lie was already out there when he checked the news later that evening. His blood boiled. Headlines screamed the narrative. Traffic stop turns deadly. Woman resists arrest. They painted her as the aggressor, twisting her pleas into defiance, her fear into violence. A shaky body cam clip surface cut and edited to show only her fumbling movements, not her begging words. Comment sections overflowed with strangers calling her another criminal, another statistic. He threw the remote at the screen, shattering it. They're killing her twice, he muttered, voice shaking. First her body, now her name. Day after day, he tried. He called lawyers, community leaders, civil rights groups. Most offered sympathy, but little else. Some promised to look into it but never called back. Others warned him quietly. The system won't touch its own. And so the weight grew heavier. Nights became unbearable. He would wake drenched in sweat, hearing phantom gunshots, seeing his mother's eyes frozen in terror. Sometimes he dreamed of holding her hand as she slipped away. Other times he dreamed of holding the gun himself. The guilt was the worst of it. He replayed every choice, every second leading up to that night. If I had insisted on driving her, if I had been there, if I had stood between her and them. His thoughts spiraled into self-condemnation until his chest ached with the pressure of it. He sat in her chair, clutching her shawl, whispering apologies into the fabric until his throat burned. But with guilt came anger, and anger had teeth. Evening, after another fruitless meeting with a lawyer who advised him to move on, he drove aimlessly through town. His hands shook on the steering wheel as he passed the very road where she had died. The skid marks were still there, faint, but visible under the streetlight. He pulled over, stepped out, and stood on the gravel where her blood had soaked into the earth. Kneeling, he pressed his palm into the dirt, feeling the cold stones bite his skin. They want me to forget, he whispered. They want me to swallow their lies. His throat tightened, tears mixing with rage. But I can't, I won't. That night, sitting alone in his car, he teetered on the edge of collapse. Part of him wanted to give up, to let the grief consume him, to lie down in the dark and never rise again. Another part of him burned hotter than fire, demanding action, demanding blood. He stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes red, face hollow. For the first time, he didn't recognize himself. He saw a man stripped of everything, dangling between despair and fury, between death and vengeance. He knew the system would never save him. It had already chosen its side. The only question now was, would he fall apart, or would he rise dangerous, relentless, and willing to sacrifice everything? He hovered at the edge of himself, half ash, half flame, staring at the blank wall where his TV used to hang. The news had turned his mother into a headline and the cop into a split-second decision. If the system had already chosen, he needed to learn its names. He started with the shooter. Officer Daniel Kincaid lived in a 2-bedroom house with a white fence and a swing his daughter never used. On the porch, wind chimes tinkled like a lullaby that refused to reach his bones. Kincaid's eyes were gray, tired, and always scanning like a man who'd memorized the exits of every room. He drank black coffee at 4 a.m., checked his holster, like prayer beads, and recited the same line to his bathroom mirror. I did my job. His wife Kayla taped their daughter's drawings to the fridge, crayon suns, stick figures, a blue square labeled Daddy's car. Kayla never asked about the night. She had learned the badge, came home with walls around it. Still, she saw the tremor when he set his mug down, the way he watched their child buckle her seatbelt with a stare that went too far away. He told himself fear made him careful, that careful was moral. The radio said officer safety. The union said hold your ground. The training videos said furtive movements kill. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing people and started seeing silhouettes. Officer Mark Roth, Kincaid's partner, carried a rosary in his pocket and a ledger in his head. He was paying for his mother's dialysis, behind on rent, and one internal complaint away from being uninsurable. He told himself there were two kinds of men, those who survived and those who complained. At O'Malley's bar, after the shooting, the union rep put a hand on his shoulder and slid a manila folder across the table. We stick to the script, the rep said, knuckles white around a beer he never drank. She reached, you feared. For your lives, you emphasize training. You emphasize policy. Roth nodded until the nod became belief. Chief Hargrove kept a framed photo on his wall. 3 young officers in crisp uniforms, his arm flung around them like a promise. 2 were dead now, 1 in a wreck, 1 by his own hand. The 3rd was him, 25 years later, not yet calculating pensions against politics. He'd risen through the ranks by being exactly what the town needed, calm in a suit, gravel in his voice, a bridge between the mayor's handshake and the union's fist. When the shooting happened, he didn't ask why. He asked how loud and how long. He summoned internal affairs and closed his door. Scope is the stop itself, he said. No fishing expedition. He instructed the public information officer to prep the statement. Tragic split-second review underway. He called the DA before calling the Sun. There was a rhythm to these things. He believed a way to keep windows from breaking and donors from calling. If the town slept, the department survived. He told himself survival was stewardship. District Attorney Leela Lawson had a smile for cameras and a calendar full of donors who didn't like surprises. She pulled the file across her desk with a manicure that cost more than the car the dead woman drove. Officer-involved shooting, she read aloud, rolling the weight of it on her tongue, measuring the angles. Election season was 3 months away. The police union had maxed out for her last cycle. The mayor wanted quiet. The judge wanted order. The town wanted normal. She could impanel a grand jury, slow walk discovery, present evidence like a surgeon removing the heart and leaving the ribcage. Non-indictment isn't injustice, she told her chief of staff. It's restraint. At home that night, she watched her son's little league game under halogen lights and told herself she was protecting a world where children could still play. She didn't wonder whose children had to die for that world to feel safe. Judge Meredith Cole believed in thresholds, probable cause, preponderance, clear and convincing, beyond reasonable doubt. She loved the neatness of them, the way they turned human chaos into lines on paper. In chambers, she sighed at the FOIA petitions from media and the emergency motions from activists. She'd deny most of them officer privacy, ongoing investigation, public safety. She had clerks, precedents, and a delicate tolerance for noise. On Sundays she sang in a small church choir, her voice steady, her faith tidy, her law even tidier. If justice was a house, she lived in the cleanest room and kept the doors locked. In this machine, everyone believed they were a gear, not a blade. That was the trick back in his kitchen. The Sun collected names like evidence: Kincaid, Roth, Hargrove, Lawson, Cole. He taped them to the wall above his mother's open Bible, as if God might draw lines between them. He started noticing the small things, the edited clip used on the news, the press conference language that matched last year's shooting verbatim, the union attorney's talking points echoed by the DA on the courthouse steps. He found a pattern of speed traps on the south side, fines stacking like bricks, revenue feeding the budget that paid for the armored truck no one needed. He found a training slide deck on line grainy stills of night threats, every silhouette the same shade dot. Ed O'Malley's Roth laughed at a joke he didn't hear and texted the group chat. Blue Waller OTH, keep it tight. Don't freelance KNC Ida copy Unihone rep IA deposition Thursday. Say I perceived a reach. Don't say I saw Kincaid stepped into his daughter's room at midnight, pulled the blanket over her shoulder, and stood there too long. When he closed his eyes he saw the woman's hands, empty shaking. The flash of his own barrel, he whispered, just doing my job. And it sounded less like absolution than sentence. Chief Hargrove rehearsed the town hall. We're grieving as a community. We ask for patience. We'll conduct a thorough review. He scratched out thorough and wrote comprehensive. The word tested better. He called the mayor to confirm the community liaison would seat friendly voices up front. A retired officer, a pastor with grant money on the line, to small business owners who owed the department for chasing off looters during a protest that never arrived. He wasn't evil, he told himself. He was preventing evil.da. Lawson reviewed the body cam, frames with a technician who paused the footage at the blur of the woman's purse. That's the moment, Lawson said. Pen tapping. The jury needs to feel that heartbeat. The tech didn't say the audio had clipped out seconds earlier when the officer shoved the woman against the hood. Glitches happen, Lawson shrugged. She scheduled the grand jury for the Friday before a holiday weekend and drafted a statement no one would pass until Tuesday. Judge Cole initialed a denial on a warrant request from a local reporter seeking the unedited dashcam over broad officer safety. She stacked it beneath a motion from a defense attorney in an unrelated case, a young black man arrested for obstruction after asking why he'd been stopped. She would deny that too. The system prized consistency. Consistency felt like fairness when you didn't look too closely. The son did. He stood outside the precinct, watched Kincaid exit a side door to avoid cameras, saw the chief's SUV idling, with its lights off, the DA glide by in heels that didn't touch the ground. He learned the times they arrived, the times they left, the routes they took to avoid traffic. He visited the road where the gravel still remembered his mother's blood and read aloud the names on his wall until each name tasted metallic. He went to church and sat in the back under the fan that clicked every fifth rotation. The pastor preached forgiveness like an emergency exit, and for a moment he wanted to run through it. But then an usher set his mother's blue hat on the empty pew where she used to sit, and something inside him sealed shut. Forgiveness was for worlds with doors that opened at dinner tables across town. The antagonists breathed like people do. Kincaid told a bedtime story about a brave rabbit who made a split-second decision. Roth microwaved mac and cheese, and called his mother to ask how she was feeling. Hargrove turned off the game when the news broke in with footage of a candlelight vigil and unplugged the TV. Lawson helped her son with homework about civic duty and smiled at the word duty. Judge Cole watered her houseplants and hummed blessed assurance. No one thought of themselves as a villain. That was the genius of it. They were men and women in a current, convinced the river was a road, but roads lead somewhere, and currents pull you whether you mean to move or not. The son pinned one last note to the wall, people or machine. Then he drew a circle around both. In the machine, people made decisions that kept it running. In the people, the machine hummed back like a lullaby that numbed you to the sound of your own heart. He studied the faces in the news one more time and felt the scale inside him tilt, its needle trembling between collapse and fire. The system was intact, armored by language and routine. If anything was going to change, it wouldn't be because the machine decided to stop. It would be because someone reached in and jammed its hand as the porch light outside flickered. As her blue hat waited on an empty pew, as a town rehearsed its phrases for the morning news, he finally stood, not because he was ready, because there was nothing left to lose. He stood in his mother's empty living room, the blue hat staring at him from the pew where it no longer belonged. For weeks he had floated like a ghost, suspended between collapse and fire. But ghosts didn't change the world. Ghosts just wandered. He was still a man. Broken, yes, but breathing, and as long as breath remained in him, the machine still had something it couldn't control. The decision didn't come in a grand moment. It came in whispers, in the grinding silence of nights where sleep never arrived. It came in the repetition of headlines calling his mother a suspect, in the way neighbors avoided his eyes, in the DA's smirk as she said, tragic, but lawful. It came in the sound of his own heartbeat every time he walked past the wall of names in his kitchen. He realized the truth. The system was never going to deliver justice. It had already written its script. If he wanted justice, he would have to write it in blood. At first, his steps were clumsy. He hadn't fought since schoolyard brawls, hadn't lifted anything heavier than an engine block, but anger has its own metabolism. He started running at night, pounding the pavement until his lungs burned and his legs shook. Each mile was a prayer, each bead of sweat a confession. He dug into his past, memories of lessons his uncle, a veteran, had once given him: how to hold a knife without cutting yourself, how to use the element of surprise. He found those skills, buried under rust, and he sharpened them again. He read manuals, watched grainy videos, and practiced alone in the garage. He learned how to move silently, how to time his breath with his steps, how to strike quick and vanish quicker. The auto shop where he worked became his training ground after hours. Tire irons became weights, jack stands became resistance tools, grease-stained rags became his bandages. The physical pain gave him discipline, the mental battle gave him torment. Every night, when he collapsed on the couch, his mind would whisper, "What if you're no better than them? What if you become the monster you hate?" He would look at the empty chair where his mother once sat, and he would whisper back, "Monsters killed her first, I'm just answering." Justice, he realized, required patience. And patience meant watching. He followed Officer Roth first. Roth's routines were as predictable as church bells. Morning coffee at the diner on 8th, afternoon shift at the precinct, late-night visits to his mother's apartment across town. Roth carried his guilt like a weight, shoulders sagging, eyes darting. But guilt hadn't stopped him from lying. Guilt hadn't saved his mother. Kincaid was harder. Kincaid moved like a man who knew enemies existed. He checked his mirrors obsessively, used side streets, parked in different spots each night, but even vigilance had cracks. Twice a week, without fail, Kincaid stopped at the same liquor store. For cigarettes, he paid cash, head down, muttering to himself. The chief was insulated, always surrounded, his SUV armored by habit and respect. The DA lived behind gates, a fortress of glass and politics. The judge was cloaked in the language of law, invisible behind robes and precedent. They were castles. He wasn't ready for castles. Not yet. He started with soldiers, but even as he stalked them, something inside him resisted. He would stand outside Roth's mother's building, watching Roth enter with bags of groceries, and he'd hear his own mother's voice. "Baby, don't let hate turn you into them." His fists clenched. "They already turned me into this in the dead of night." He sat with his mother's Bible, flipping through pages he barely understood. Words about forgiveness blurred with words about wrath. He slammed it shut. What's forgiveness to a coffin? Still, the doubt gnawed at him. He imagined his mother's disappointment, her gentle smile turned to sorrow. Would she want this? Would she recognize the man he was becoming? He stared into the mirror until his reflection looked like a stranger. Hollow cheeks, red eyes, muscles hardening from rage instead of hope. He whispered, "Am I a monster?" And the silence offered no answer. The night of his decision came without warning. Rain slicked the streets, neon lights bleeding into puddles. He sat in his car outside the liquor store, engine idling, breath fogging the windshield. Kincaid entered at 11:07, just like he always did, cigarettes in one hand, wallet in the other. The cashier nodded with weary recognition. When Kincaid exited, the sun followed. No plan, no blueprint, just rage with legs. He moved through the rain, hood-low footsteps matching the thunder. Kincaid. His voice cut through the storm. The officer froze. His hand twitched toward his holster, but the sun was faster. The tire iron came down, cracking against Kincaid's wrist. The gun clattered to the ground. Kincaid staggered, eyes wide, mouth fumbling for words. Weightless beneath Sun's arm swung again, this time across Kincaid's jaw. Blood sprayed against the rain. Years of power, of arrogance, crumbled in an instant. Kincaid fell to his knees, choking teeth broken. "You begged her," the Sun snarled, voice shaking. "And you shot her." Anyway, Kincaid's gray eyes searched the storm, searching for mercy. But mercy had died the night his mother did. The final blow landed with sickening finality. Silence followed, heavier than thunder. Kincaid lay sprawled on the pavement, rain washing the blood into the gutter. The Sun stood over him, chest heaving, hands trembling. He expected relief, maybe triumph. Instead, he felt hollow, empty. He whispered, "I've crossed it now. There's no going back." He drove home in silence, the tire iron wrapped in cloth, the rain still pounding against the windshield. In his chest, the war raged louder than ever. One voice screamed, You did what had to be done. Another hissed. You're just like them now. At home. He scrubbed the iron until it gleamed, though the stains lingered in his mind. He sat in the dark, shaking, replaying the sound of bone cracking under his swing. His stomach turned. He vomited into the sink, then collapsed against the counter, tears streaming down his face. But when he looked at the war names, the faces of the machine, he felt something shift. The fear that had paralyzed him was gone. The grief that had drowned him was sharpened into a blade. He had taken control, not cleanly, not heroically, but he had done what the system never would. He had made one man answer. The machine would notice. Soon Roth would hear, the chief would cover, the DA would calculate, the judge would shield, the walls would close in. But for the first time since his mother's death, he wasn't begging. He wasn't waiting. He was hunting. The rain had washed Kincaid's blood off the pavement, but not out of his memory. The hollow in his chest remained, but it pulsed now with purpose. One gear of the machine had stopped turning, yet machines are built to keep going, and this one had shields, spokes, and endless defenders. The morning after, the news ran a quiet headline: Officer found dead in parking lot. Foul play suspected. The anchor's tone was almost sympathetic. Tragic loss of a decorated officer, investigation ongoing. Not a whisper about his mother. Not a whisper about the sins that led to that night. But in the precinct, whispers swelled. Cops looked over their shoulders, muttering in locker rooms, their voices caught between fear and rage. They didn't know who had done it, but they suspected, and suspicion breeds defense. Chief Hargrove convened an emergency meeting. The blinds were drawn, the air stale with burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. We have a problem, he said, voice gravelly. Somebody thinks they can take justice into their own hands. That's a message, and we can't allow messages like that to spread. The union rep leaned forward. We close ranks. We paint Kincaid as a hero. We make sure the story doesn't shift. The DA's office released a statement that afternoon. Our community mourns the tragic death of Officer Daniel Kincaid, who served with courage and dedication. They promised a full investigation, but not into Kincaid's record, into his death. Within days, patrol cars began sweeping the neighborhoods he frequented. Friends called to warn him. They're asking about you. They're knocking on doors. The cops didn't have evidence, but evidence wasn't the point. They had intimidation. They had presence. And when intimidation didn't work, they tried bait or nights. As he walked home from the shop, he noticed a sedan parked a block from his house. Same car, every night. He'd catch the silhouette of a man pretending to read the paper, pretending not to watch. He learned to slip out back alleys, to keep his head low. The hunter had become the hunter. At first, his neighbors whispered support, quiet nods at the grocery store, murmurs of, we know what they did to your mama. But when Kincaid's funeral aired on TV, full honors, flags folded, a 21-gun salute, the whispers turned to silence. To avoid him became safer than to stand with him. His closest friend, Marcus, came by one evening, shoulders tense. Look man, I get it. I loved your mama too. But this, he gestured to the wall of names, the maps, the notes scrawled in rage. This ain't the way. They're watching you. They'll bury you before you even get close. They already buried her, he shot back. Eyes shot. Marcus swallowed hard, voice low. Then don't let em bury you too. The words stung. But what stung worse was the distance in Marcus's eyes, the fear. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to walk away. And when he left, the silence felt heavier than ever. Family wasn't better, his cousin called, voice trembling. Baby, I'm scared for you. They're saying things. That you got into trouble before, that maybe you snapped. Lies spreading, like wildfire, framing him as unstable, violent, dangerous. A mirror image of how they framed his mother. Even his pastor cornered him after service. Son, vengeance is the Lord's, the old man said, gripping his shoulder. This road you're walking, it won't bring her back. It'll only take you deeper into the dark. He pulled away, his voice flat. I'm already there. The next strike from the system wasn't so. Luthi woke one morning to fists pounding on the door, police warrant in hand. They tore through his house closets, drawers, even the Bible on the table, and when they emerged, they carried a plastic bag with a handgun inside. Unregistered weapon, one of them said. Illegal possession. He stared in disbelief. That's not mine. They didn't care. They cuffed him, dragged him to the station. Hours in a freezing cell, questions thrown like darts. Where were you the night Kincaid died? Who can vouch for you? Why do you hate cops? He answered nothing. Silence was his shield. By evening, a lawyer secured his release. But the stain lingered. The news whispered, person of interest released pending further investigation. They had planted the seed. The town saw him not as a grieving son, but as a suspect. The system had spoken. We can make you guilty whenever we want that night. He sat in his darkened kitchen, the gun still vivid in his memory. Not the planted one, the one he'd taken from Kincaid's hand before striking the final blow. He had buried it under the floorboards of his garage, hidden like a secret too heavy to destroy. He stared at the wall of names, fists trembling. He had won one battle, but each step forward pulled him deeper into the swamp. Every move invited more lies, more traps. His mother's voice haunted him. Don't let hate turn you into them. But then came the other voice, darker, louder. They already did. The moment they pulled that trigger, they made me into this. He pressed his forehead against the cool wall, whispering through clenched teeth, am I losing myself, or finding who I really am? The question gnawed at him. Justice and vengeance blurred until he couldn't see the line any more. The machine didn't stop, so neither could he. He watched Roth for weeks, torn between pity and rage. Roth was unraveling, drinking more, praying harder. His guilt leaked through every gesture. But guilt hadn't saved his mother. Guilt hadn't stopped the lie. One night Roth staggered out of O'Malley's bar, drunk, keys fumbling. The sun stepped from the shadows. Mark Roth froze, eyes wide, recognizing the voice. Oh God! The son's hand tightened around the blade hidden in his jacket. His chest heaved with conflict. He could end it here. End another link in the chain. Roth raised his hands, voice trembling. I didn't pull the trigger. It was Kincaid. I didn't stop him. You lied for him. I had to. They'd ruin me. My mum, she needs treatment. I need the job, please. His words cracked, tears spilling for a moment. The sun faltered. Roth looked less like a monster and more like a man trapped in the same machine, but then he saw his mother's face in his mind. Her hands raised, begging. He struck. Quick, precise. Roth collapsed, breath gurgling into silence, and in that silence, the sun broke again. News of Roth's death hit harder. 2 officers dead now. The department went on high alert. Checkpoints sprouted across town. Plainclothes followed him, though never close enough to arrest. A DA appeared on TV, fury veiled in calm words. This coward is targeting our heroes. We will not rest until he is caught. Heroes. That word poisoned him. His own world shrank. Friends stopped answering his calls. Family stopped visiting. The pastor's door stayed closed. He ate alone, slept in snatches, woke to phantom sirens. Every time he stepped outside, he felt eyes watching. The machine was tightening its grip, but the tighter it squeezed, the more certain he became that his path had no exit except through. The final blow to his fragile hope came from Marcus late one night. Marcus showed up again, nervous, pacing. They know it's you, man. They're building a case. I told them you couldn't have you told them. His voice cut like steel. Marcus's face crumbled. I didn't give them proof. I swear, I just said you've been acting strange. That maybe grief was messing with you. Rage flooded him. You gave them exactly what they wanted. You handed them their story. I was trying to save you, Marcus shouted, tears in his eyes. They'll kill you, man. They'll kill you and bury the truth. The sun turned away, his voice hollow. Truth died with her. All that's left is what I make. Marcus left, shoulders heavy with shame, and with him went the last thread of trust. The sun stood in the garage, staring at the tire iron, the knife, the buried gun. His hands shook as he picked each up, weighing them. Justice or humanity? The words pulsed in his skull. Each kill pulled him further from the man his mother raised, but each kill felt like a crack in the armor of the machine that murdered her. He whispered to the empty air, am I saving her name, or losing my soul? No answer came, only silence, only the sound of his own breath, heavy and ragged. The machine was pushing back, harder each day, but so was he. Armed in that clash, something darker was being born. Not just a son seeking justice, but a weapon, sharpened by grief, wielded by rage. Not just a son seeking justice, but a weapon, sharpened by grief, swung against a machine that never bleeds. Sat in the garage with the tire iron across his knees, the knife on the rag, the hidden gun under the floorboards humming like a secret. The wall of names looked back at him. Kincaid, Roth, Hargrove, Lawson, Cole. He'd taken to. The others felt like brick and mortar, harder to break, harder to reach. The machine had tightened its jaws. Checkpoints, whispers, planted evidence, friendly anchors asking how a community could heal from anti-police violence. He'd learned the lesson. You don't break a fortress by punching stone. You slip in through a window that somebody forgot to lock. Roth had a window. The dead often. Roth's phone lay face down on the workbench. He'd kept it powered off, wrapped in foil, waiting for a plan to arrive. Now he turned it on. The screen bloomed with missed calls and prayer hands from his mother, and below them, a cascade of messages in a thread called Blue Wall: union rep, 2 sergeants, a training officer, a policy advisor with a city email, and they're buried midweek at 7:12 a.m. A message that made his breath stall. Your REP scope is the stop only. No deep dive. Phrase as perceived reach. Push IA to limit frames. DA aligned. There were more. A link to the same slide deck he had found online. Night threats, but with a stamped seal. A memo from the chief's office to the PIOUs. Tragic and split second. Avoid escalation language. A copy of a bodycam transfer log that didn't match the public times. Tiny crooked nails in a coffin big enough for a town. He copied them all. Screenshots. Downloads. A thumb drive tucked where the gun lay. He wrote a note and scheduled it to send to a dozen reporters and 3 civil rights lawyers. If the message didn't cancel by 2:30 a.m., the files would go. Then he bought a burner phone and dialed a number he had practiced saying out loud. Chief Hargrove answered on the second ring, voice flat and dry. "Who is this?" "Meet me," the son said. 2:13 in the morning. "The road where you let my mother die, that's not how this works. It is tonight," he said. "You come alone, and I don't send everything I have to the world. You've got my word." Silence, the sound of the chief thinking like a chess player who hates the board. "Alone," Hargrove said at last. "Or the deal's off." "Alone," the son said, and hung up. He put his mother's blue hat in a paper bag. He drove out before midnight. The town fell away into a road ringed by tall weeds and tired billboards. The night felt thick again, as if the past had gathered to watch. He parked 100 yards back, and walked the rest with his hands empty, the tire iron hidden under the trunk lid, the knife strapped against his spine. He placed the blue hat on the bent guardrail where the gravel still remembered. 2:13 came like a held breath. An SUV coasted to the shoulder, lights off. The chief stepped out. No suit this time, dark jacket, boots, face carved into stone. He closed the door without looking away. "You picked a symbolic place," Hargrove said. "Makes for dramatic speeches. Did you bring anyone?" The son asked. "I said I'd come alone." The chief's gaze flicked once to the darkness behind. "The son, did you?" The son didn't answer. He held up the burner phone and tapped the screen so Hargrove could see the countdown. 17 minutes until send. "I end that when I hear what I need, and what's that?" "The truth," the son said. "Not your phrases. Not your training words that make murder sound like the weather." "I want to hear you say what you did, what I did," Hargrove repeated, almost amused. "You killed 2 officers. You want to play priest with me?" Lightning stitched the horizon. The wind lifted the edges of the blue hat. He narrowed the internal review. The son said, voice low. "You told IA to frame the stop. Keep context out. You fed the PIO the script. Your union fixed the language. The DA timed the grand jury like a holiday, quiet and forgotten, and a woman is in the ground." Hargrove's jaw flexed. He took a step closer, hands visible. "I kept this town from burning. You kept your donors from dialing," the son said. "And you kept a killer working until I stopped him." Hargrove's eyes flashed. "What you did to Kincaid wasn't justice. It was the same thing you claim. To hate say her name," the son snapped. "Say you buried her." Truth. Something passed across the chief's face, a shadow, a crack. "I told IA to stay narrow," he said at last, each word slow, like stone from a grinder. "We always do. You open the door and the wolves get in. And if you think the DA takes my calls, you don't understand the game you're playing." The son took another step. They were close now, the graveled shoulder crunching under their boots, the distant hum of a highway too far to help. "I understand enough," he said. "You can't fix a system by pretending it's a person. You act like a gear and then tell yourself the machine is fate. And you think killing the gear stops the machine?" Hargrove asked. "You've made martyrs. You've made me allies I didn't have a month ago. That's what blood does. It hardens lines." "Blood hardened me," the son said. Her blunt, "Your lines were already hard." They stood listening to the wind run through the grass like whispers in a crowded room. Hargrove looked at the blue hat on the rail, and for a moment his face softened into the man in the old photograph on his office wall. "Take me in front of the cameras," the son said, pulse hammering. "Stand next to me and tell them the truth. Tell them the memo, the chat, the edits. Tell them you chose order over honesty. Say it, and I end this here." Hargrove shook his head. "I can't give you what you think you want. You want a world that doesn't exist. You want a town to wake up different because a man cried on television. I want a town to stop lying." The son said, "Every town lies," Hargrove said softly, "so it can keep going to work. So its kids can play ball under halogen lights. So the grocery store opens at 9. The lie is the oil in the engine. Taking it out doesn't stop the car. It melts the block. You sound like a pastor who lost God. The son said, I sound like a man who outlived his illusions. Hargrove said they moved at the same time, Hargrove stepping sideways, the son reaching behind him. The chief's hand flashed to his waistband. The son's fingers found the knife. Metal met night air. The chief's pistol came out high. The son surged low. The blade kissed the underside of the chief's wrist. The gun bucked toward the stars. They collided, bodies slamming into the rail, the blue hat spinning into the road like a bird knocked from flight. The fight was ugly because real fights are no choreography, no clean lines, gravel, teeth, breath, grunts, pushed through clenched jaws. The chief fought like a man who had broken up bar brawls before he learned to speak to cameras. The son fought like a man who had trained in a garage while whispers told him he was already dead. They rolled the pistol skittering into the weeds, the knife flashing once, twice, drawing a line across the chief's cheek. The chief's elbow found the son's ribs, pain popped white. The son's head cracked the rail. Stars exploded behind his eyes. Enough, Hargrove hissed, his forearm pressing the son's throat to steel. You want to die here for a speech, for a feed full of strangers with torches. The son clawed found the man's jacket, drove his knee up mean and hard. The hold broke. He shoved Hargrove back and scrambled to the pistol. His fingers closed around the grip. He rose fast, breath ragged, vision tunneled to the black hole of the muzzle. Don't, the chief said. Hands up now, blood beating at his jaw. If you pull that trigger, you finish the circle. You finished it the night she begged you with her eyes. The son said she begged him. Hargrove said, I didn't pull the trigger, you gave him the world that made it easy. The son said he would remember this forever. Hargrove's face tipped in the red wash of his SUV's dashboard light. The road, a dark ribbon, the blue hat lying like a fallen sky. He would remember his own reflection in the pistol's slick metal eyes, wild mouth open, a man he didn't recognize pointing a machine at another man he didn't forgive. He heard Kincaid's words like a ghost. I did my job. He heard Roth's plea. I didn't pull the trigger. He heard his mother humming under old records, wood spoon tapping the side of a pot. The air tasted like rain and pennies. Am I becoming a monster too? He asked. Not to Hargrove, not to the night, just into the space where his mother used to be. Hargrove lowered his hands an inch. We all are, he said, and for once it didn't sound like a line. That's what the job does. That's what this town does. It makes you choose between the stories you tell yourself and the ones you can afford to live in. The phone in the son's pocket buzzed. 9 minutes until send, he breathed, the gun steady, his hand not. Then tell me a different story, he said. Tell me something that makes me put this down. Hargrove swallowed. I narrowed I told the PIO the words. I called Lawson and said, keep it quiet. He looked at the ground when he said the last part. I did it because I've seen what happens when it isn't quiet. The son's thumb slid along the phone screen, brought up the camera, and he hit go live. The red dot blinked. The viewer count started at 1, then 3, then 27. It would not be enough to change a world on its own, but it might be enough to start a crack. He held the phone out, the gun lowered an inch. Hargrove's face sharp in the wash. Say it, the son said. Say it. For them. Hargrove stared into the tiny red light like it was a jury. He looked older than the photo on his wall, older than the suit he wore to briefing. We narrowed the scope, he said at last. We framed the narrative the way we always do. I called the DA, I told her to time it. I told my people the language. He paused and added, almost to himself, I thought I was keeping the town. Together, the comments began to slide like rain. Oh God, are you seeing this? Chief is admitting it. Who is the guy with the gun? Call 911. It's already called. From the bend in the road. A whisper of tires. The son didn't look. He kept the lens on Hargrove. Tell them her name, he said. The chief took a breath. Your mother's name was Lillian Carter. The name bent in his mouth. She should not be dead. Light washed the weeds white at first, then red and blue tearing through the night. The viewer count jumped to 218, then 400. The son felt the wave coming and knew there wasn't time to swim. He reached into his pocket and thumbed the scheduled message, paused the send, then set a new rule. If the stream cut off unexpectedly, the files would go. Sirens, doors, a bullhorn voice ripping the air. Drop the weapon and get on the ground. Hargrove's eyes flicked to the lights. He lifted a hand, palm out. Stand down, he shouted. Stand. His voice dissolved into the bullhorn's command. On the ground now. The son looked at the gun, then at Hargrove, then at the blue hat. The choice was a blade with two edges end it with blood, and become the thing he hunted, or bet his life on a truth he had barely managed to drag into the light. He remembered the funeral lily and would polish hymns to clean for the dirt. He remembered the pastor's hand on his shoulder, the old man's voice, "Vengeance is the Lord's." He remembered laughing bitterly at that and then waking nights to wonder if it was the only rope left to hold. He dropped the gun gravel, puffed. The weapon lay peaceful as a stone. He raised his hands and lifted the phone higher so the stream could see the arc his life had taken and the man who had helped bend it. "Turn it off," Hargrove said. "Low. They'll shoot you, they might," the son said. "But if they do, the files go, and if they don't, the files go anyway on the ground." The bullhorn roared, "Tell them to stand down." The son said. Hargrove stepped forward and raised both arms. "Stand." The first officer rounded the cruiser with his sights up, another flanking left, one more angling toward the weeds where the pistol had vanished. The chief's own men ignored him because fear had outranked command. "Hold your—" Hargrove tried again. A beam of light caught the son's face. He squinted, the world reduced to glare and noise and a phone's hot rectangle in his palm. He had never felt more exposed or more certain. "This is what you made," he said into the live feed. "This is the machine. I won't kill him. I won't be you. But watch what the machine does to me for choosing the truth." Hargrove turned, desperation shredding his calm. "Weapons down," he shouted. "He's unarmed." He killed 2 officers. A voice answered from behind a shield. "Drop the phone." The son slowly knelt. The gravel dug into his knees. He placed the phone on the rail, propping it so the camera still framed them both. The view count flashed past 1,600, comments flooding the bottom of the screen like a river. In flood season, Hargrove crouched beside him, hands raised, his breath clouding the air. "Don't move," he whispered. "They're wired tight." "I'm done moving," the son said. "I'm done running. I did what I came to do." "Which was what?" Hargrove asked to hold a mirror. The son said, "For me, for you." He met the chief's eyes. "Now you decide what you see." Boots fanned out, the semicircle tightening. Red dots wavered on his chest and throat like a strange constellation. The bullhorn gave way to a human voice, jittery and young. "Hands where? We can see them." "They're up," he said, not looking away from Hargrove. "Say one more thing. Say you'll testify to what you said here. Say you'll open IA. Say you'll give the full body cam, the transfer logs, the memos." Hargrove's mouth worked. He looked at his men, at the guns, at the blue hat. The machine clicked around him, hungry for the next notch in its belt. For the first time, he seemed to feel his own weight in its gears. "I'll open IA," he said, voice frayed. "I'll release everything on oath," the son said. "On camera, I swear," Hargrove said, eyes steady now. And for a second the man in the photo, the one with his arm around Rookie's, came back and stood in his place. "Hands," the young officer shouted again. Closer now, the muzzle shaking. Like a leaf the son didn't move. "If I don't walk away," he said to the chief, "you do it anyway." "I will." Hargrove said. The son closed his eyes for a heartbeat and saw his mother at the stove, humming, stealing bites from his plate. He opened them and took in everything at once. The road, the hat, the chief, the ring of weapons, the tiny red light on the phone that had become the world. "I won't be you," he said, one last time, more to himself than anyone else. Something happened in the corner of the scene. Movement, a silhouette near the weeds. An officer kicked the pistol by accident. It bounced, clacked, and the sound sparked a panic bred by training videos and bad nights. A shotgun. The world contracted to a point. Fingers tightened. The air cracked. He flinched, expecting heat, but the shot split the night into silence. No impact. No pain. The bullet had buried itself in the rail inches from the blue hat, sending a spark that died as quickly as it was born. Every muzzle froze. Every breath held. The chief spun, voice drilling into the stunned quiet. "Weapons down." Now, this time, they listened. Muzzles dropped. Someone swore softly into their collar mic. The young officer looked like a child who had just realized the stove is hot. The son let out a breath that had lived in him since the night she died. He reached for the phone. No one stopped him. He ended the stream and, with a shaking thumb, cancelled the scheduled send and attached the files to the broadcast and hit post. The truth would not be clean. It would be picked at and passed and talked around, but it would be out. Timestamps, memos, chat threads. The chief's on-record vow. It would have to be met with something more than a phrase. Hands still up, he looked at Hargrove. The chief's eyes were wet and hard at once. He nodded once, a tiny motion that could have been respect or surrender. Cuffs came, cold and inevitable. They read him his rights with the careful diction of men who had nearly stepped into history the wrong way. He didn't argue. He didn't look away from the road, from the hat, from the place where grief had started and a different version of him had almost ended, as they led him toward the cruiser. He turned his head and said, loud enough for the microphones and the dark, her name was Lillian Carter, and she was not a suspect. Hargrove stood with his hands on his hips and faced his men. We're done lying, he said, and it sounded like a man stepping onto a new floor, unsure if it would hold. The son ducked into the back seat. The door shut with a weight that felt like consequence, not closure. The town around them didn't change. The store would still open at 9. The ball field would glow under hell. But somewhere inside the machine, a gear skipped, a rhythm stuttered, and a mirror stayed up, refusing to drop. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass and let the night blur into lights. In the reflection, he saw the outline of a man who had almost become the thing he hated and, at the last second, chose something harder, not forgiveness. Not yet, but truth ugly and brightened the willingness to pay for it. The car rolled forward, and the blue hat lay on the rail like a small piece of sky. Waiting for morning, they shut the cruiser door and the night fell away with a thud. The blue hat stayed on the rail like a small piece of sky he couldn't take with him. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass and watched the road slide backward, watched the dark swallow the place where he'd almost finished the circle and at the last second, stepped out of it. Booking was fluorescent and slow. Fingerprints, a camera that didn't blink, a property bin that swallowed his belt, his shoelaces, his mother's Bible. You'll get it back, the deputy said without looking at him. He didn't correct the man. You don't get anything back that really matters. They left him in a holding cell that smelled like bleach and old stories. In the next cell, a man muttered at the ceiling as if God might be hiding in the vents. Somewhere down the hall, a metal door complained. He closed his eyes and saw the live stream's red dot, the chief's face, the ring of muzzles, the word gun, like a spark in dry weeds. He waited for regret to arrive. It didn't. Instead, a hollowness spread through him, not peace, not victory. Just the quiet that follows a storm that has torn off half the roof. By morning, the world had decided what to call the night. Screens wrapped the story in banner text and commentary. Police chief admits narrowed scope in deadly stop. Leaked chats suggest coordinated messaging. Vigilante suspect in custody. Clips of the live stream ran on a loop, cut with the funeral. Footage that had given Kincaid a flag and his mother only a hat on a table. The view count climbed. So did the noise. Chief Hargrove stood at a podium at noon, tie crooked, voice rough. Effective immediately, internal affairs is reopened. All materials body cam, transfer logs, internal memos will be released. Reporters shouted questions about resignations, about the union, about the DA. He didn't answer those. When someone asked for the woman's name, he said it without flinching. Lillian Carter. He looked older after he said it, as if names carried weight when spoken into microphones. Inside the jail, the day stretched like taffy. An attorney came and introduced himself with a thin smile. You're a cause now, he said, not unkindly. Causes bring help, but causes also bring heat. 2 counts of murder, he explained. Aggravators likely. The state would come hard. The union would demand it. If there's a plea that keeps you breathing, we should consider it. Breathing isn't the same as living, he said. It's the precondition. The lawyer replied. Let the truth you posted do its work. You don't need to die to prove it's true. He lay on the bunk after the lawyer left and stared at the hairline crack in the paint. The crack looked like a road on a bad map. He traced it with his eyes until he fell into sleep like a ditch. When he woke, a deputy said he had a visitor. Marcus stood on the other side of thick glass, both hands spread as if he could hold his friend's life in place with his palms. Shame lived in his eyes, grief lived under it. I brought the hat, Marcus said, voice thin through the phone. Chief dropped it at your house, said it belonged there. He swallowed. I'm sorry for talking, man. I was scared. I still am. Me too, he said. But we can't live on our knees. I don't know how to live at all right now, Marcus admitted. He shifted in his chair. People are choosing sides. You know how it is. Your mama's name, people saying it with respect now, others spitting it with but. Tragedy, but. Sad, but. That word will be the death of us. But murdered her, he said. But covered Ethia, also looking at what you did, Marcus said, eyes wet. They're calling it murder too. It is, he said, the truth sitting heavy and cold. There's no word that makes it something else. Marcus bowed his head. If there was another way, there wasn't for me, he said, and the admission tore something, and stitched something in the same breath. That might be the worst part. The machine began to grind in unfamiliar directions. Internal Affairs published full bodycam footage. The missing audio around the shove was suddenly present. The memo from the chief to the PIO leaked in a file dump. The union chat messages crawled across news scrolls. DA Lila Lawson went on television and called the leak irresponsible, then recused herself the next day after a committee announced a review of donor communications. A special prosecutor took over. Judge Cole recused as well, citing appearance of partiality, a phrase that said more than it meant to. A civil suit filed by a rights group turned the town ledger into evidence. Speed traps, revenue streams, training contracts, grants dangled in exchange for order metrics. The council called a special session. The chief sat for 8 hours under oath and didn't reach for his phrases. He said, "I did more than we." Did he used his own name in sentences that hurt. When asked if he'd resign, he said, "If it helps the truth breathe, yes." A week later he stepped down. He didn't hold a press conference about it. None of that changed the paperwork in the prosecutor's file with the son's name typed neat at the top. Kincaid dead behind a liquor store. Roth dead in the dark behind a bar. Autopsy reports don't carry context. Blood dries without commentary. The lawyer returned with an offer. Count 1, second-degree murder. Count 2, voluntary manslaughter. Time would be 32 to life with eligibility at 23. Otherwise, we roll the dice with a jury that will be asked to treat this like 2 separate nights with bodies, and a man who admits he put them there. He thought about the deal on the bunk that night, listening to the jail breathe through grates and pipes. He imagined the trial of the wives and mothers in the gallery, the suits, the photographs blown up on easels. The word monster floated gently by people who would insist they weren't calling him that. He pictured his mother in the second row, hat straight, hands folded, and knew she wouldn't be there. He pictured himself on the stand, telling a story with a beginning and a middle but no ending anyone could call good. In the morning, he told the lawyer to take the deal. The hearing was gray and careful. The special prosecutor read the facts like recipes. He didn't look up when he said the words tire iron or knife. When it was the son's turn, he stood and faced the bench and said, "I did it." The courtroom took the breath it had been withholding. "I did it," he repeated, "and I am sorry." He let the sorrow stand there without decoration. He did not ask the court to forgive what the law could not. He did not ask the families to understand what he barely did. Kincaid's wife spoke. She said the word vigilante like a curse, and also said she wished her husband had come home a different man long before he didn't come home at all. Roth's mother spoke, voice paper thin, describing a boy who shared his sandwich in second grade and a man who made a bargain with fear. Pain can hold 2 truths at once. The courtroom was not big enough for either. Before the judge imposed sentence, the son asked to say one more thing. He didn't turn to the gallery. He looked at the seal on the wall behind the bench and spoke into it as if it could hear. "I wanted justice, and I went looking for it with my hands when the door wouldn't open for my voice. I found something else. I can't give it a clean name. I exposed a lie, and then I told a few of my own so I could sleep. I won't beg for mercy. I ask only this: say my mother's name in this room before you say mine." The judge did. Then, she read the years like measured rain. Transport to state prison tasted like pennies again. The yard was a postcard of gray and chain link under a sky that didn't care. Men moved in practiced routes, exchanging looks that did not require speech. He learned the codes quickly. Don't ask, don't tell, look once, not twice. He kept his head down and his back straight. In the library he found a Bible that had passed through many hands. He found Lillian in its margins twice, written in 2 different pens. He didn't know if that meant anything, but he kept turning to those pages anyway. Marcus wrote once a week and came once a month. Sometimes they talked about the case as if it were a weather system that had passed through town and rearranged the furniture. Sometimes they talked about nothing at all on purpose. Once Marcus said, "They're naming the community kitchen after her, Carter House." "You'd have hated the ribbon cutting." "Yeah," he said, almost smiling. "She would have tied the bow straighter." Chief Hargrove wrote a letter, short and tight. "I testified. They're changing policy. Training too. It won't fix what happened. I don't expect you to thank me. I won't ask you to forgive me. Keep the hat dusted when I sit in the back pew. That's as close as I can get to prayer." The letter ended without a signature. He kept it anyway. The special prosecutor announced charges against the union rep for obstruction. An oversight board recommended decertification of 2 training modules. The city council passed an ordinance that made it harder to hide footage. Behind holidays, headlines flared, then cooled. The machine adjusted. It always does. But here and there, a gear turned slower, a bolt seated tighter, a hand paused before it reached for the old script. Tiny mercies, late mercies. They did not balance any scales. They did not bring her home. He took to walking the yard at sunrise. When the air was thin and the world was nearly quiet, He would circle the track and count his steps and let his mind sit with his mother by the porch that no longer had a chair on it. He spoke to her under his breath sometimes, not asking for anything, just reporting. They said your name on TV. They said it in court. They put it on a sign. On certain mornings he could almost hear her humming over the radiator hiss. Peace did not come something else. Did a kind of consent to carry. He understood this was what remained when revenge exhausted itself and justice ran out of names. Not relief, not absolution. Just the willingness to live with the weight without pretending. It should be lighter. On the anniversary of the night, he asked for time in the chapel. The chaplain let him sit alone. He placed his palm over the thin wooden table where other men had set other grief and closed his eyes. He didn't pray. He said her name. He said it until the sound lost meaning and became only rhythm. When he opened his eyes, the room had not changed. He had, slightly. Months later, a volunteer brought a parcel from his house, a cleared property bin item with a note, personal effects returned. Inside lay his mother's Bible and, wrapped in tissue, the blue hat. Regulations didn't allow him to keep the hat in his cell, but the chaplain agreed to place it on a shelf in the chapel, high where dust would take time to settle. You can see it when you come, the chaplain said. He nodded without trusting. His voice started at night. The cell's polished steel mirror gave back a face he had learned to recognize without liking. Lines had made homes where anger used to sleep. The eyes weren't wild now, just awake. He would look at himself and ask the old question, am I a monster? And then let it pass like a train he had decided not to board. Monsters enjoy their work. He had never once enjoyed it. Back in the house he no longer lived in, morning light still traveled across the kitchen table as it had always done. Dust settled on the rim of a mug that had waited too long. A Bible-shaped shadow on the wood marked a place where weight used to rest. If a passerby peered through the window at the right hour, they might see the air hold the shape of a woman, moving between stove and counter, humming under her breath, stealing a bite from a pan that would never burn again. He ended most nights the same way, sitting on the edge of the bunk, fingers threaded, eyes on the small square of steel that held his reflection. He would imagine a door opening, not here, not now, but somewhere into a room where names were said without, but where a mother's last word was not a plea and a son's last act was not a weapon. He knew he would not step through that door. Not soon, maybe not in this life. He stood anyway, because standing is a kind of stubborn hope, and pressed his palm to the cold mirror until the warmth of his hand fogged it over and erased his face. In the chapel, high on the shelf, the blue hat waited in a shaft of dusted light. In the empty house, her picture sat on the table, tilted slightly, as if listening. Between those two quiet altars stretched the distance he had chosen and the price he had paid. Justice had changed the town's words. It had not resurrected its dead. He switched off the light and lay down. The dark held, the hat waited. The picture watched, and the road outside, somewhere beyond the fences and the razor wire, ran past a bent guardrail where the sky touched gravel and never ever told the truth by itself.